Good morning and welcome to the Meaningful Stakeholders Consultation and Communication. My name is Wendy Fons and I am the ESSER Director for the Office of Public Instruction in Montana. And with me today is Rebecca Brown, who is the Program Manager.
Hi, everyone.
So we appreciate you coming in today to talk about meaningful stakeholder consultation and how that relates to the ESSER grant. We're going to go through a series of slides. There are quite a few. This session is being recorded. It will be posted on our OPI website under the frequently asked questions and guidance section, and then a whole section we have on training. So all that information will be available later for review. There's some hyperlinks that you may want to look at later as well. As we go through this presentation, don't hesitate to put questions in the comment section or chat session. There is about a 15-second delay, so it may take a minute for us to respond to the question. We will also have at the end of the presentation a period of time for question and answers, which will not be recorded. So you can reach out to us in a variety of different formats as we present this material. Next slide, please. So to start with, I do want to just acknowledge that this is our contact information, and ask if you could put into the chat session those of you who have spoken with either Rebecca or I via phone, or if you have emailed with us. That just gives us an indication of who may be individuals that we've seen before or communicated with before, as opposed to those who may be new to meeting with us. So if you could put that into the chat, that would be great. These are our contact information. We are available by email and also by phone. So don't hesitate to reach out to us in either mode. Next slide, please. So our goal for today is to really address who are the stakeholders when we're talking about ESSER. And of course, schools have a variety of different stakeholders, but this session is specific to ESSER, to the ESSER grant. And then what that consultation means, how that communication occurs, and looking at the why. Why are we needing to reach out to our stakeholders, and touching upon that cliff, that what's going to happen at the end in 2024 with these funds and the stakeholder engagement, how that can help support that cliff from really occurring in that manner. Next slide, please. So who are our stakeholders? On the ESSER side, we have several, and we didn't list these in any particular order. It's just a general list for you. So you have school staff. Those are very important stakeholders. We also, of course, have the school boards. We have students and parents. And in the parent category, there could be booster clubs. There could be National Honor Society under communities. But there are these different clubs that parents often belong to that are tied to the school. And that's part of the parent stakeholders component. As far as community organizations, there are a lot of educational organizations in the state of Montana that are very interested in how the ESSER funds are being used. So those are meaningful stakeholders like 4-H and Key Club, Rotary clubs, local churches and restaurants, unions, of course, the mayor's office or Chamber of Commerce or county offices. All of those individuals are interested in, and organizations are interested in the discussion of how ESSER funds are being used. So this is an important dive into the stakeholders. You can, of course, from your own side in your own local area, list out who those may be that are most important. Next slide, please. There's a question in the chat that asks about, do we have a private chat session? So you can privately chat us in terms of via an email. So we actually are doing double duty, going back and forth between things. Or you can chat with us after the session. The chat session itself is generally open to anybody who's on the session. So good question on that. Consulting with stakeholders. So the term that is used in the ESSER Compliance and the frequently asked question document produced by the Department of Education does say meaningful consultation. And so posting something on a website is a consultation in a way. It is a posting of information, but it's not an engagement. So you do want to consider how you are actually gaining an engagement, a dialogue, a conversation with your stakeholders. So you want to ask, what issues your community views as important, and therefore what you might want to have as a forum for discussing the ESSER funds. What ideas does your community have that might feel it's important to discuss on the educational platform? And again, how does ESSER relate into that? We have a lot of schools who might be putting in a playground, or they might be doing an extension to a science library with ESSER funds, or they might be adding an after-school program. And those are all areas that the community probably wants to get engaged in, and having meaningful consultation at school board meetings, open at different parent gatherings. Those are all very good places to have this discussion. You can contain it within a survey where you're doing a hard copy document to individuals, because internet is not always great in all of our settings. You can also send maybe you do a yearly letter that's sent out to all of your residents in the community, all the taxpayers. I know that's done in some districts, and they highlight, here are the things that are coming up. These may be some topics that are covered at the school board, including the ESSER plan, use of fund plan. You can send home with students a survey. You can do a Facebook survey, a polling. So there are a number of different ways that you can do a community survey, and that's one way that you can do that consultation in an engaged platform. You can have open houses. So one of the things that's interesting about the ESSER funding is you can actually use the ESSER funding to help provide finances for an open house, for example, for an open house event. If your students are involved, or a booster club or the school foundation is involved in funding a particular project along with ESSER, those two entities can work together in an open house format to engage the community. And of course, there's sort of this term of town hall meetings. So that's a broader reach out to the community, could be through the Chamber of Commerce, or just a general bringing the community together to discuss educational opportunities, of which ESSER is a major component. Next slide, please. So why is this important? This communication is important because we are anticipating there's this cliff that's going to happen. And I really like this picture that shows somebody looking over the cliff and being worried about, okay, so what happens when these funds disappear? One of the things to keep in mind is the fact that the community generally will support successful programs. And so if you create a program with using the ESSER funds and you promote that out, you're talking to the public about this programming effort that you've done and how ESSER funds have helped. When those funds dry up, you have a success story that's already been out in your stakeholder community. And so you're able to say to them, you know, we really benefited by having these tutors that were a joint effort between, say, the 4-H Extension Office and ours, focused on math and STEM projects. But now, unfortunately, the 4-H grant has run out, and so has the ESSER grant run out. But we'd like to keep this program going. What resources in the community might be able to support this? That is a much easier ask than going to those entities and saying, we don't have a program, we can't give any evidence of success, and we want something to be supported. So think in terms of how the ESSER funds can actually help your school build future revenue or build future funding cycles, sources, through using ESSER funds as a means to build success. So you use the current funds, you build a program that's very successful, and then you go back to the community and say, now these funds aren't available. Can you help support the program going forward? And there are often a lot of foundations that will come forward to help support that. Next slide. Communicating out to your stakeholders, again, it's that continued support and building partnership. The more partnerships that you have within the community, the stronger that link will be. And I think, again, this picture is very helpful because the hands all have different roles, but they're all connecting into a uniformed entity. And the strength is in the partnership that occurs through that. So looking at our communities as a strong support for our educational programming effort that we do is important. ESSER funding is one source of that support, but it is by no means the only source of support. Next slide. The other reason to do stakeholder engagement is compliance. So the grant itself does require, it has this statement that says meaningful stakeholder input. And that must be done at least twice a year, within 6 months. The Department of Education has this in their frequently asked question guide and other guidance as well. OPI is required to look at plans that identify here's how we're using these funds in June and December of each year. So we recommend that then districts do their updates or reviewing and stakeholder engagement in November and May. You may do them at any time that you wish, again, meeting the compliance of at least every 6 months. However, we have to look at that compliance in June and December. So that's the time that we're going to look at those. The plans themselves can be posted on your website. They are posted on our website. Again, you can hand them out at different board meetings or have just a hard copy available for parents. You can also have them electronically, a request for the full document. So there are a lot of different views that you can use to disseminate these plans, the use of funds, and safe return out to the public. Next slide. Again, looking at the why are we communicating out, it's really a matter of keeping your students and your parents and the whole community informed about the benefits of these ESSER funds. And one of the ways you can do that a lot is by using photos. So, showcasing something that you have purchased with ESSER funds or an event that's been covered by ESSER funds. Those are very impactful to communicate the benefits of these funds and how they've been used. So really try and utilize that. You can get students involved in this process too by simply asking them, what have you benefited from these funds? So asking them to create a brochure, asking them to do a photo gallery, all of those things can help students understand the benefit of the funds, and the students can then share out to their parents and their connecting point. This is what our school did with these funds. Next slide. How to communicate with stakeholders can be in a variety of different ways. So again, I just talked about photo galleries, using photos. There's always that statement of a photo is worth 1,000, picture is worth 1,000 words. I think that's important. You do probably need on those photos some kind of a caption that identifies ESSER. Otherwise, people will go, oh, this is a great photo. But understanding that the photo is in relationship to the ESSER funding is important. So you can do it, again, hard copy. You can do it on Facebook. You can have TV and newspaper articles written. One piece here to kind of think about if you have students involved in this publication and the engagement of stakeholders is that students, when they become engaged in this process, if they are volunteering their time, they can actually use that time also as a means of skill development. So if you have your yearbook group actually also create a brochure for how ESSER funds are being used so that you can push that out to the community. If they do that as an internship or they do it as extra time as part of, say, the National Honor Society in connection with, or Key Club in connection with the yearbook class, that can become extracurricular activities and can be tagged into scholarship time. So you can use it kind of in a double way that way, and students often enjoy taking photos of events and describing what happened at those events. Adding in a tag that the funds came from ESSER is part of the discussion that they're having to build stakeholder conversation. Next slide, please. So here again, I just kind of have a slide that shows a little bit about the National Honor Society and Key Clubs and the benefits. So you can tag into CTE credit. It's real work experience that students can earn credit instead of doing study hall or senior release. They can create flyers. They can even create a website. They could create a page on your school website that says, here's specifically how ESSER funds have been used. That would be something to do. Connecticut, I think it is interesting. They actually gave, I think it was 1 million of ESSER funds directly to students to allocate out in grants. So if you want to get that creative, you can do that as well. Rotary and PEO and retired teachers, again, that's a tag in for engagement that you can involve them in this discussion of how the funds are used. Hospitals and businesses, of course, are interested in how the funding is being used because they're looking at employees. So they are interested in educational funding from that standpoint. Next slide, please. So the communication and format substance, what does that look like? And we're going to transition now to the next set of slides. And Rebecca is going to go ahead and present at this point.
All right, so I did want to gather and put together a few examples of what this stakeholder communication can look like. By no means is this an exhaustive list. These are just some ideas, some methods that we have seen that we wanted to present to you for your information. So the first way that you could communicate out to your stakeholders, your community, would be like, for example, an article in the paper. And I grew up in a small town in Montana. We had our town newspaper, and that newspaper was full of pictures of sporting events, list of scholarship recipients, things like that. It was really a current events type of communication of what is going on in our community. And so this would be a really good way for your school to engage your community and let them know what's going on with your ESSER funds, how you're using them, how you're thinking about using them. And an article in the paper can be as simple as just a picture with a small caption underneath it, or a full page spread with multiple pictures. It just depends on your communication style, your community, and how much information you have available about it. But again, pictures worth 1,000 words. It is really impactful when your community can see exactly what's going on with those funds. So there's one idea. Next slide. Another idea along the same lines is utilizing social media. We are in the age of the internet now. Social media has been around for a long time, and more it is able to be used as a communication tool to your community. The schools that I attended and the schools that I taught at, they had at least a school Facebook page. Quite a few of them actually had a separate Facebook page or account for their different clubs. So like, for example, the student council, they had an Instagram account, and all of the student council activities they posted on Instagram, and they were being followed by most of the students in the school and quite a few of the parents as well. So that was another way that they could engage the community that was just a different aspect. Social media is really impactful, especially if you can use pictures, but on a mostly text-based platform such as Twitter, for example, that's where you could put a little blurb, a little bit of information about what you're doing, and then hyperlink to your school website or add a picture in there, and just tease a little bit of the information and show them where they can go find more. So that's another idea. Next slide, please. We also really encourage you to utilize your school website or your school web page. Over on the right-hand side of this screen, there are a few examples of Montana school websites that have their ESSER information, their COVID-19 information on their website. And this can look very different depending on your school. We've seen schools who have an entire web page dedicated to just their ESSER approach, their plans, the Safe Return and the ARP ESSER plans, which you do need to have posted on your website. And so they incorporated that with all of their big projects as well. There are other schools who they just have news updates. Every time there's an update on a project, they put it out on the website. So it's kind of a live feed. So that's another way that you can really engage your community by having all that information on your website so they can find it in one place. Next slide, please. Another way that you can communicate out to your community about your ESSER plans is by using the project scope. So this you may have seen before. We presented this when we were talking about the large project or large purchase pre-approval process. When you have a large purchase or project that's over the $5,000 threshold that needs pre-approval before you begin on that process, this scope document, this is what you fill out to inform OPI of all of the aspects of this project, the alternatives that you've looked at, the costs, the funding sources, everything. And if you're already creating this for OPI approval purposes, you have this really robust document with the entirety of your plan that is a really easy or simple way to communicate out to your community as well. So you could just verbatim distribute this, or you could copy and paste out of your scope document into a web page or into a social media post or into an article. So that's just another way that you can incorporate your ESSER processing with what you are actually communicating out to your community. Next slide, please. When you are doing this in all of your communication and in all of your stakeholder engagement, remember bringing it back to the students. How specifically do your students benefit from these purchases? So for example here, how does an HVAC system, heating and ventilation, how does that enhance student learning? Well, an HVAC system, it filters the air, which it reduces airborne pathogens, it limits the spread of infection. That means that your students will have fewer illnesses and illness-related absences, which, if they're not missing school, that's preventing learning loss. So you are responding to and preventing learning loss. And then another example, if you are doing a network upgrade, so you're upgrading your firewalls, your access points, your routers, things like that, how does that benefit students? Well, by improving the connectivity and speeds while the students are on campus, that helps students to address existing learning loss. Maybe you can use a really robust online curriculum or an online-based textbook or things like that that really helps students while they're on campus. They can watch YouTube videos or resources that are connected to what they are doing in class while they're on campus. But then while they're off campus, if you have improved your connectivity, that will improve remote instruction. So if a student does get sick or they're traveling and they have to do remote learning, by improving the network on campus, that allows you to communicate with them better while they're off campus. And so again, that is addressing and preventing further learning loss. So even if at the very surface level, it doesn't seem to connect to students, we really encourage you to dig in and really identify how the students benefit. Because again, the whole purpose of these grants is to benefit our students. Next slide, please. And then when you are looking at communicating to stakeholders, there were some examples of what that communication can look like, but now you also need to think about the audience. Who do you distribute it to? How do you get the information out beyond just an article in the paper? So next slide, please. We do encourage you to utilize those local and regional newspapers. So I have links to the main Montana regional newspapers here. But like I said, I grew up in Conrad, Montana, a small town. We had our own newspaper, the Independent Observer. And so if I were working with ESSER funds in Conrad and I wanted to communicate out to my stakeholders, I would send something to the Independent Observer, but I would also send it to the Great Falls Tribune because that's the regional newspaper that everybody got as well. So utilize both local and regional. Next slide, please. You can also utilize TV news stations. I've seen multiple TV spots where the camera crew went into a school and they looked at what student project that students were working on, or they brought students into the studio and they got to do kind of a show and tell of what they were working on. And being able to communicate that out to your community, but also these TV stations are regional. And so maybe when someone from Conrad, for example, gets a news spot, then somebody in Valier or in Great Falls or in Shelby could see that, and maybe that could help to inspire or connect communities across the state. So that's another way. Next slide, please. Yeah. Radio stations. Growing up in Conrad, Montana, there was a radio station that was the actual station was located about 20 miles down the road, and we actually knew the people who worked there. We would call in and talk to them, or they were an active part of that community. And so by involving those radio announcers and bringing them into the school, or sending them your social media post or your newspaper per article, involving that radio station, they can really help to connect and engage that community as well. And then if you're going to host, something like an open house or like a town hall meeting, you share that out in the newspaper, you share that out on social media, and then you have a radio spot where you say, hey, come to the open house that we're hosting tomorrow night, things like that. So involve your radio station as well. Next, please. To wrap up here, and Wendy, I'll hand this off to you. I just really encourage you to remember that ESSER is to benefit our students. And when we benefit our students, we benefit the overall community.
So just in terms of a wrap up of what we've talked about, the importance of sharing out with stakeholders is twofold. There is a grant compliance component that is a requirement, but really the compliance is more, the benefit is more on just sharing and building those partnerships with you as an educational entity, the schools, and the community around you. When you're looking at where or how, you want to really think about anywhere that people gather. That's a good place to share out information about education and about these funds. The ESSER funds are there to make your community stronger. That education is at its very core. That's what we're doing with education. And you know your community strengths, you know your partners better than anyone else. So the list that we've provided, the resources that we have here are just samples. They're things that we have seen in our walk across the state, but you know your community best. And so looking broadly and deeply at your own community and saying, where do people gather? What organizations might be interested in this? And really sharing out how those ESSER funds are benefiting your local community and the outcomes that are benefiting the outcomes that are occurring directly to student gain. Next slide, please. So just in terms of wrap up, we did want to share again our OPI website. This is the homepage, and ESSER is on the right-hand side. That's an opportunity for you to dive into all things ESSER, as it were. We also want to point out to you just briefly the broadband button at the bottom of that list. And we do have a short survey on there that just has 3 questions. We have a lot of grant funding coming into the state on the broadband side that is not ESSER specific, but it is broadband specific. So we do encourage you to go off and to take that survey. It's only 3 questions. It really does benefit our ability to say to the foundations that are providing and the government that are providing these funds, this is why we need these funds. So please take a look and have an opportunity to do that survey. Feel free to dive into the ESSER tab. And finally, feel free to contact either Rebecca or I or both on any questions that you have going forward with ESSER. This is our contact information, both phone and email. Thank you so much. Are there any questions at this point? We'll go ahead and stop the recording and just ask, are there any questions?